Welcome to Serving Latinx Students from Culture to College Access. I'm Carla McIntyre, College Access and Success Manager at Conexion Americas. So you're watching part 2 of a 3-part series that we have for you all. And make sure that you check out part 1 before you're watching the part right now and finish with watching part 3 with Lynn Listo, our college success coach. So at Conexion Americas, our mission is building a welcoming community and creating opportunities where Latinx families can belong, contribute, and succeed. We have 3 core areas of services and programs. We have an education team, an economic team, and a community and civic engagement team. In part 2, we're going to look into cultural competency and understanding Latinx families. For today, we're going to look into working with Latinx families and building culturally responsive approaches. We'll start off by learning who are Latinos, some cultural norms, best practices for working with Latinx families and college aspirations, student and college-going culture, and lastly, what are some qualities of culturally responsive programming? There will be points today where I ask us to pause for reflection. It's a good time to grab a piece of paper, pencil and pen, or if you're taking electronic notes, to have those available as well. So who are Latinos? I want to preface this by saying that all of the terms that we're going to talk about today were created in the US. Most families that are recent immigrants or those that grew up in a different country might not be familiar with these terms, since they normally in their country of origin recognize themselves as that country of origin. But I encourage you to work with families and students to understand how they would like to self-identify. So Latino, Latinx, Latine, Hispanic may be used interchangeably. Hispanic is anyone from a Spanish-speaking country, which includes Spain. Latino, Latina is anyone from Latin America or born to a Latin American parent. Latinx is a gender-neutral version of the term above. Latine is a gender-neutral version of Latino that is easier to pronounce in Spanish. All of these terms denote an ethnic group with a shared language and some common culture and heritage. Immigrants, the person living in a country other than that of their birthplace. Not all Latinx students are immigrants. About 65% of Latinos are born in the United States. And a note on English language learners is that not all Latinx students are EL students, and not all EL students are immigrants. So we're going to cover 4 basic kind of cultural norms that we see with our families. Number 1 is family versus individual. The family unit is very important to our families. However, dynamics can vary. It can look like having both parents or grandparents at home, maybe older siblings, or live in multi-generational household. So it's key to ask students who is there to support them in their educational journey. As we learn more about who's involved in their life, another important thing to know is that decisions are made as a unit. This is sort of a version of individualist versus community culture. This is why we might see parents or students shy away from opportunities that are perfect for the student, but are not feasible within the family unit. Authority, hierarchy versus respect. In the US, we tend to hope that people, regardless of age or education, can earn respect and be respected. Latinx culture is slightly more hierarchical, and parents might not ask questions of teachers or they think that their own opinions aren't important due to teachers or counselors having more knowledge or education. So this can lead to parents not asking questions, which can also affect how students are taught to ask questions at home. And the reality is that sometimes our students might not know how to ask for help. See, working class students are taught that they should just put their heads down and work harder. Asking for help is selfish and an opportunity to be reprimanded. Many of our students worry that they're a burden and are bothering you and will not tell you when they have questions or if they're feeling lost. Most education systems operate on a middle class norm, and we expect students to feel comfortable asking for help. But as educators, it's good for us to clarify when and how to ask for help and encourage our students to recognize that asking for help or saying that they're confused is a good and normal part of the process. So really the goal is to strive for promoting and normalizing questions and feedback within our family and students. And yet all of this really pulls on the belief that adults, aka parents, are the ultimate decision makers and authority in their home. When there are disagreements on college going aspirations, this can cause a lot of disillusionment for both parents and students, and depending on who's more eager to go to college. And this can lead sometimes to an action which can then be perceived as a lack of interest, antagonism towards college, which is not true. It's just simply cultural differences. Okay, so let's take some time to pause for reflection. How have you noticed any family versus individual norms with students or with families? What percentage of your students ask questions or request feedback? How do you plan to promote and normalize questions or feedback with families and students? And kind of one tip for here is to reframe how you welcome questions. I think we generally, when we give an assignment or when we talk to families, it's just laying the foundation of, let me know if you need help. If you have any questions, let me know. And knowing that our students have a hard time asking for help, knowing that our parents sometimes might not feel as confident asking those questions, I want to encourage you to reframe and maybe try something like, I'm happy to answer any questions or doubts that you have about X or anything else that comes up. You're not bothering me at all. Or maybe, what's been something confusing about X? How are you feeling about it? Really, those discovery questions can help our students reflect a little bit more on their need for asking for help or also asking for clarification and feedback. So number 3 is going to be present versus future. In the US, it feels like we're always planning for the future. Historically, we ask students what they want to be when they grow up. We talk about school transitions, we talk about when you're older, etc. We even know the college process, or at least building towards it, starts in 9th grade or even earlier than that. However, Latinx families are more rooted in traditions and ways of doing things as usual, so aka their children living at home, and in the present. And some of this is impacted by context, income, or the need to survive. And that's why sometimes it feels to parents and students that college is so far away or something that they can do the spring before graduation. This is why, again, early education and parent engagement is important. We do see families, of course, on the opposite side of the spectrum, but traditionally, most of our families operate in the present timeline. When we're looking also at present day responsibilities, our students sometimes will have dual responsibilities. The expectation can sometimes be with parents that a student is a student at school, and when they're at home, they're at home. So depending on that family dynamic, they might have other responsibilities at home, and students might serve as family translators, child takers, or even work part-time with the family or for the family. So as you're working with students, get to know them a little bit more and find out what information on the role that they have in their family unit. Personal relationship oriented versus time and professionalism. So finally, this last one relates to trust, body language, and time. So we are a people of culture, and the concept of time is very relaxed and flexible to us. We may show up late to an event, but we will stay until the very end. The things that in the US culture might read as rude, for us, it's more about making time for people. And this might be why schools read parents as uninterested, inconsiderate, and parents read schools as cold and unwelcoming. If punctuality is an expectation where there's no flexibility, it's important to communicate that to the parent, student, and family prior to meetings and programming. And ultimately, within this, we encourage you to demonstrate openness, warmth, and interest in the whole child. And again, to remember that Latinos are not a monolith, and building trust is key. So as we pause for reflection, how have you seen this present versus future reflected in the families and students you work with? How have you communicated punctuality expectations to families? Is there a way to build in flexibility? How can you create equitable opportunities for engagement? We'll dive into some best practices with working Latinx families. The philosophy is asset-based thinking. We always want to assume that families care deeply about their children's education. Really want to expand the definition of engagement, get to know families and what they bring to the table. And this kind of goes at the core of meeting families and students where they're at. Again, want to position parents as experts of their child and experts of their own experience. Assess assets, characteristics, and needs of the community. So reach out to organizations, talk to parents, ask students what they do on the weekends, where they go, where they eat, who they spend time with, etc. Learn about values and beliefs beyond surface representation of culture. And this work is never done. It's think about your own identity, your values, your beliefs, and how this informs your work with students and with families, including how this influences power dynamics and interactions with family members. Planning with intentionality, access versus availability. So consider the challenges that influence attendance and plan accordingly. As often as possible, offer workshop events when families are available and provide food and childcare. If the school is not accessible to parents, consider alternate locations. As we're thinking about programs, we don't really have a lot of time for parent input, but with Latinx families and really parents in general, it's really important not to operate from the form of if we build it, they will come. We really want to consider what's going to be possible for families to attend, what's going to be equitable for families to attend. So this includes planning ahead. So work with the school system to send home translated materials, and whenever possible, have interpreters present during events. Conduct outreach in a variety of ways and seek input from parents on what is most effective. Reach out or begin identifying key parents whenever possible. Reach out to them for input or for help to conduct your research and outreach. If you develop parent leaders that are trusted members of the community, they can share information or invite other parents through word of mouth. And especially with our program at Conexion Americas, we have seen that parent allies is so important to our work, and they get things done. And so the sooner that you're able to identify those key parents that can help build that kind of community culture, the more effective that programming can be in the long term. Other points for access and versus availability. Be sure to explain educational jargon and expand your definition of jargon. So give parents concrete ways to connect to complex concepts. Sometimes icebreakers or reflection questions can help create a meaningful bridge between the content shared and the family's goals or aspirations for their child. And looking at more of how you create and structure family night or FAFSA nights. This one is really key, is how can you get the family involved into that process instead of just giving them information that night? How can you really build that relationship and find ways to connect with really complex concepts that might be presented in those nights? So when sending materials home with families, focus on essential knowledge. Remember that not all parents will have a high native language literacy skills. So even if you get a piece of document translated in Spanish, it doesn't necessarily mean that a parent at home is going to be able to read it and understand it. This is an opportunity to share, again, concrete tools or strategies with parents that allow them to support their children's academic growth. So be sure to carefully explain how these tools or strategies work, create opportunities for parents to follow up, and ask questions, again, whether that's in person or in other ways. If you see improvement or changes in the student, let the parent know. Lastly, have resources available to families, and when you don't, follow up to find an answer. Be sure to consider how accessible the resource is and whether the parent might need support to make use of it. Nurture positive relationships and mindful interactions. So consider body language in meetings and cultural expectations when families come into the classroom. So learn about appropriate ways to greet and welcome families. Create positive relationships with families, positive phone calls, home visits if you're able to, picnics before school starts, etc. Get to know key staff and community partners that can facilitate those relationships between you and the parent, but please be kind and conscientious of their time. Also, attend student events where you might meet parents. Sports games are a good way to do this. Find ways to bring family and culture into the classroom. Find ways for homework to be done with parents, or sharing photographs or multicultural, multilingual books. So when you're meeting with the family, it's important to convey interest in the child as a whole person. So what are they like at home, their siblings, their interests, comments that they make about school, study habits, what the parents want or worries about regarding their child. Use the parents' expert input to create a fuller picture of the student. And this can help you interpret a child's behavior or academic performance at school while also building trust with the family. When talking about student work, don't create a data wall that physically separates you from the family member. Try to sit side by side and inspect work together. This last piece, as someone who grew up translating and being an interpreter for the family, really important to practice some of these tips. And so when an interpreter is helping you communicate, talk directly to the parent and use your body to convey interest when the parent is talking. Avoid phrasing your conversation with language like, can you tell her, him, that? Be sure to pause often for your interpreter and speak at a normal pace, not too fast, not too slow. When a child or a family member is in the role of a translator, think about the interaction as a three-way conversation. The dynamic needs to change in this situation to be more inclusive and responsive to whoever is assisting the parent and the family member. Okay, so dive into Latinx families and college aspirations. So family context and perceptions are really important. Again, culturally, big decisions tend to be made as a family unit. Parental aspirations for their children are very high, but many parents don't know how to support their children in the application process. Again, there might be parents who went to college in their country of origin, but are totally unfamiliar with the college education system, higher education system. We have parents that did not have maybe a high school diploma education, and so all they know that if their children get the opportunity to graduate high school, that's a big accomplishment, which it is, but sometimes they just don't know how to support them past that. Most families can be very supportive of the college going process, but can sometimes prioritize work or caretaking responsibilities for younger siblings. And truly, it's because of economic need. Many parents don't want their children to attend out-of-state institutions. And this can kind of create some tension as students are starting to look at their options. And it's all about, again, giving the information to families, helping them see the students' options. But in reality, a big percentage of our students that we work with that go to college will stay in Tennessee. Very few actually will leave the state. And again, this can be with a lot of reasons, because they have responsibilities at home, because of fear of the student being far from home and not being minutes away. And so families ultimately are going to have a lot of questions regarding financial aid, but they don't know where to start or what to ask. And summarize everything with college aspirations, it's that really all families want the best for their children, always assume best intent. As we're starting to have these college going conversations and aspirations, take a moment to look at these. And again, let's figure out, how do we request questions? How do we get our families and our students to ask for help? How do we give them feedback in this process? For students and their college going culture, is that most of our students are going to be first generation college students in the US, and some students might have had a parent attend college in their country of origin, but are very unfamiliar with the process here. Some students can feel disillusioned by the college going process and might need support to think about their long-term vision. Again, that present versus future self. And so sometimes others have been told that it's going to be possible or that it's not going to be possible, either because of money or immigration status, and they need consistent and early positive messaging. DACA and undocumented students are a diverse group who are not individually distinguishable from every other student. Some undocumented DACA students have been living and attending US schools for most of their lives, while some might have arrived in their middle school or high school years. Contact and language skills may affect college going aspirations. And we'll learn a little bit more in part 3 about the different barriers that our DACA and undocumented students have in Tennessee to access college. It is possible, but there are going to be different ways to advise those students to make it a reality. So take a look at the terms and the norms and some best practices. How can you make sure that your efforts and your programming and your events have qualities of culturally responsive programming? So in order for that, we need to consider barriers to access, which can be childcare, times offered, breakfast or dinner included, offered in Spanish. So let's take some time to reflect. What barriers to access do parents face in your school or organization? Which of these can you solve within the institution? Who can support you in these efforts? What institutional or budgetary priorities would have to shift? Responding to cultural norms. Personalized outreach, parent-friendly flyers and communication, people-oriented greetings and workshop norms, one-on-one reminders and communication, plan with the parent needs in mind. Position parents as experts. Reflection. What are the cultural norms of the families that you work with? Who can support or advise you to better learn these norms? What practices can you change or modify institutionally or personally to better work with these families? What assumptions or priorities would need to shift to better serve these families? And lastly is tailor content and instruction. Focus on essential knowledge, make use of adult learning theory, scaffolding multi-level content, practical over theoretical knowledge, and connect to available resources and support systems. So a reflection. What are the reading and writing levels of your family? How can you differentiate content and instruction to better meet the needs of parents? Who can offer the time and support to do this planning work? What information, skills, or policies are key to engaging with your school or organization? Are these the focus of your events? And as we look more into connecting families to available resources and support systems, I do want to take us to a Casa Safran Community Center. So Conexion Americas is the leading partner of Casa Safran, and Casa Safran is home to a collaborative of nonprofit organizations offering services in education, healthcare, legal, civic engagement, arts, and more for immigrants, refugees, and the whole community. And so we have 9 different partners. There's our phone number at the very bottom of each one. If you have any questions about the services that any of these partners offer, feel free to call our information and referral hotline, which is 615-270-9252, and we'll be able to refer you to whatever agency that we have that can help you with any situation. So if you have any more questions about the content that we talked about today, feel free to reach out to Lindley Stowe, which is our college success coach, and she provides counselor and education trainings, student appointments, FAFSA support, and alternatives. And then Esperanza Romero, which is our Gear Up coordinator with Conexion Americas, and she offers college access, educational support for Latinx students in 9th and 10th grade at Cambridge, Overton, Glencliff, and Antioch High Schools. Thank you for learning a little bit with me today, and hopefully you are ready to check out part 3 of our 3-part series.